The buzzards circling overhead were the first sign that something had gone terribly wrong, their dark shadows sweeping across the prairie grass like omens of death, as Jake Everett reined in his chestnut mare and squinted against the harsh Wyoming sun at the scene spread before him in the valley below. He had been riding the trail between Fort Laramie and the trading post at Deer Creek when he spotted the carrion birds. And now, as he urged his horse down the slope, the full horror of what lay ahead made his stomach turn. Wagons lay scattered and broken, their canvas covers torn and smoldering, belongings strewn across the ground like discarded children's toys. Bodies lay motionless in the tall grass, and Jake counted at least a dozen as he approached cautiously, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. This was a massacre, plain and simple, and from the looks of it, the attack had happened sometime yesterday afternoon. Jake was no stranger to violence in this territory. At 26 years old, he had spent the better part of a decade working cattle drives and serving as a scout for wagon trains heading west. The year was 1875, and while the frontier was slowly becoming more settled, danger still lurked in every canyon and behind every rise. He had seen his share of attacks, accidents, and tragedies, but something about this scene hit him harder than usual. Maybe it was the child's doll lying face down in the dirt, or the wedding photograph blown against a wagon wheel, the glass shattered but the faces of the young couple still visible beneath the cracks. He dismounted and walked among the dead, his jaw tight with anger and sorrow. Men, women, even children had been cut down without mercy. The work of raiders, he suspected, though whether they were renegades or bandits posing as natives, he could not say. What mattered now was making sure there were no survivors who needed help. That was when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the whisper of wind through grass and the harsh cries of the circling birds. A whimper, human and terrified, coming from beneath one of the overturned wagons. Jake moved quickly, his boots crunching on broken glass and splintered wood as he approached. Two bodies lay tangled together near the wagon's remains, a man and a woman who had clearly tried to shield someone or something with their own flesh. "Hello." Jake called out, his voice gentle despite the grim surroundings. "If anyone is alive, I am here to help. My name is Jake Everett." Another sound, this time unmistakably a gasp of fear. Jake knelt beside the bodies, trying not to look too closely at their frozen expressions of terror and pain. Beneath them, pressed into the blood-soaked earth, he could see fabric, a blue calico dress, and then a hand, small and pale, fingers trembling. "Easy now," Jake said softly. "I am not going to hurt you. Let me help you out of there." He carefully moved the bodies aside, treating them with as much dignity as he could manage given the circumstances. Beneath them, curled into a ball so tight she seemed half her actual size, was a young woman. Her blonde hair was matted with dirt and blood, not all of it hers, and her green eyes were wide with a terror so profound that Jake felt his heart crack open at the sight. "You are safe now," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew how hollow they must sound to someone who had just witnessed such horror. "Can you move? Are you hurt?" The young woman stared at him as if he might be a hallucination, her lips moving but no sound emerging. Jake extended his hand slowly, the way he might approach a frightened horse. "My name is Jake. I am going to get you out of here and take you somewhere safe. Can you take my hand?" For a long moment she did not move. Then, as if coming back to herself from somewhere very far away, she reached out and placed her trembling hand in his. Her grip was surprisingly strong despite her obvious shock, and Jake helped her stand on unsteady legs. She swayed against him, and he caught her around the waist, feeling how thin she was beneath the layers of her dress and petticoats. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Lucy," she whispered, her voice hoarse as if she had been screaming for hours. "Lucy Walker." "Lucy, when did this happen?" "Yesterday," she managed. "Late afternoon. They came so fast, we never had a chance to circle the wagons properly. Papa tried to fight them off, but there were too many. Mama and Papa, they pushed me down and covered me with their own bodies. I could hear everything. The screaming, the gunshots. I thought they would find me, but they did not. I stayed there all night, too afraid to move." Jake felt rage building in his chest at the cruelty of what this young woman had endured, but he kept his voice calm and steady. "You were very brave. Your parents saved your life. But we need to leave here now. Can you ride a horse?" Lucy nodded, though she looked as if she might collapse at any moment. Jake whistled for his mare, and the horse trotted over obediently. He helped Lucy into the saddle, then swung up behind her, his arms on either side of her as he took the reins. She leaned back against his chest, and he could feel her whole body shaking. "I have you," he said quietly. "I am not going to let anything else happen to you." The ride back to Fort Laramie took the better part of 4 hours, and Jake used that time to piece together what had happened from Lucy's fragmented account. The wagon train had been heading to Oregon, 20 families seeking new lives in the fertile valleys of the West. Lucy's father had been a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania, and her mother a seamstress. They had sold everything they owned to make this journey, dreaming of land and opportunity. Lucy herself was 19 years old, and had been engaged to a young man named Thomas Carter, who had been riding scout for the train. His body had been among those Jake had seen, an arrow through his chest. By the time they reached the fort, Lucy had fallen into an exhausted silence, and Jake could feel her weight heavy against him as she drifted in and out of consciousness. The gates of Fort Laramie opened to admit them, and Jake was immediately surrounded by soldiers and civilians alike, all wanting to know what had happened. He waved them off, carrying Lucy to the home of Dr. Samuel Morris and his wife, Beth, who ran a small boarding house for travelers. Beth Morris took one look at Lucy and immediately ushered her inside, clucking with maternal concern as she called for hot water and clean clothes. Jake stood in the doorway, suddenly at a loss now that his immediate purpose had been fulfilled. Dr. Morris joined him, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and steady hands. "What happened out there?" the doctor asked. "Wagon train massacre about 15 miles northeast," Jake replied grimly. "She is the only survivor I could find. She was hiding under her parents' bodies." The doctor shook his head sadly. "I will send word to the commander. He will want to send out a patrol, though I suspect whoever did this is long gone by now." Jake nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere. He found himself thinking about Lucy's green eyes, the way she had looked at him with such desperate hope, as if he were her last connection to the world of the living. He had saved people before, pulled them from floods and fires, fought off attackers, but something about this felt different. Maybe it was the senseless brutality of what had been done to those innocent families, or maybe it was the quiet courage Lucy had shown in surviving such an ordeal. "Can I see her tomorrow?" Jake asked, "just to make sure she is settling in all right." Dr. Morris studied him for a moment, then smiled slightly. "I suspect she would appreciate that. Beth will take good care of her tonight, but the girl has lost everything. She will need friends in the days ahead." Jake returned to his small cabin on the edge of the fort grounds, but sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the massacre site, heard the phantom echoes of screams and gunfire that Lucy must have endured. He thought about her lying there in the dark all night, too terrified to move, not knowing if the attackers would return. How did a person come back from something like that? The next morning, Jake was up before dawn, washing and shaving with unusual care, though he tried not to examine too closely why he was suddenly concerned with his appearance. He picked wildflowers on his way to the Morris house, then felt foolish and nearly threw them away before Beth Morris opened the door and smiled at the sight of them. "How thoughtful," she said warmly. "Lucy is awake, but she has not eaten anything yet. Perhaps you can convince her to try some breakfast." Jake found Lucy sitting in a rocking chair by the window, staring out at the fort grounds with hollow eyes. She wore a borrowed dress that was slightly too large, and her hair had been washed and braided. She looked very young and very lost. "Good morning," Jake said quietly, not wanting to startle her. Lucy turned, and for a moment her expression remained blank. Then recognition flickered across her face, followed by something that might have been relief. "You came back." "I said I would not let anything else happen to you," Jake replied, setting the flowers on the table beside her. "I am a man of my word." The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Wildflowers. My mother loved wildflowers. She would pick them every morning on the trail and put them in a jar in our wagon." Jake pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. "Mrs. Morris says you have not eaten. You need to keep your strength up." "What for?" Lucy asked, her voice flat. "Everyone I love is dead. Everything I owned is gone. What am I supposed to do now?" It was a fair question, and Jake did not have an easy answer. "You survive," he said finally. "You honor the sacrifice your parents made by living the life they wanted for you. And you let people help you, which I know is not easy for someone who has always been strong." "How do you know I have always been strong?" Lucy challenged. "Because you survived when 19 other people did not," Jake said simply. "That takes more than luck. That takes a will to live that most people do not have." Over the next few weeks, Jake found himself visiting Lucy every day. At first, the visits were brief, just checking to make sure she was eating and sleeping, that she was not falling into the dark place he could see lurking behind her eyes. But gradually, the visits grew longer and their conversations deeper. Lucy told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about learning to read before she was 4 years old, about how her father would recite poetry to her while her mother sewed by lamplight. She spoke of Thomas, her fiancé, though Jake noticed she did not cry when she mentioned him. It was as if she had gone beyond tears, to some place where grief was simply a fact of existence rather than an emotion to be expressed. Jake talked too, more than he usually did with anyone. He told Lucy about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about losing his own mother to fever when he was 12, about the years of drifting that had brought him to Wyoming. He described the beauty of the territories, the way sunrise looked over the mountains, the sound of cattle lowing in the evening, the smell of sage after rain. He wanted to remind her that the world still held wonder, even after so much darkness. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Lucy asked him one afternoon as they walked along the parade ground, her hand resting lightly on his arm for support. Jake considered the question seriously. "Because you deserve kindness. And because when I found you out there, something in me knew that your life mattered more than anything else in that moment. I cannot explain it better than that." Lucy stopped walking and looked up at him, really looked at him, for the first time since they had met. "You saved my life, Jake Everett. I do not know if I have thanked you properly for that." "You do not need to thank me," Jake said, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. "Yes, I do," Lucy insisted. "You could have ridden past. You could have assumed everyone was dead and not checked carefully. But you did not. You stopped. You looked. You called out until I answered. That was not just chance. That was you choosing to care." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that went deeper than gratitude or simple friendship. Jake felt it like a physical thing, a cord drawn tight between them, and from the way Lucy's breath caught, he knew she felt it too. But Jake also knew that Lucy was grieving, traumatized, vulnerable. Whatever he was feeling, he could not act on it. It would not be right, not when she was so broken and he was the one person she had trusted to keep her safe. So he simply smiled and said, "Come on, Mrs. Morris will have supper ready soon, and she gets cross if we are late." As summer deepened into August, Lucy began to heal, at least on the surface. She helped Beth Morris with the boarding house work, cooking and cleaning and making beds for the soldiers and travelers who passed through. She was good with her hands, quick and efficient, and Jake suspected she was grateful for work that kept her mind occupied. But he could see the shadows that lingered in her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden noises, the nightmares that sometimes woke her screaming in the middle of the night. Jake had taken a job as a civilian scout for the fort, which meant he was often away for days at a time, but he always came back to check on Lucy. He told himself it was just to make sure she was all right, but the truth was harder to ignore with each passing week. He was falling in love with her quiet strength and sharp intelligence, with the way she could find humor even in dark moments, with the kindness she showed to others despite her own pain. One evening in late August, Jake returned from a week-long patrol to find Lucy sitting on the porch of the Morris house, mending a shirt by lamplight. She looked up as he approached, and the smile that lit her face made his heart stutter in his chest. "You are back," she said, setting aside her sewing. "I was worried. Beth said there were reports of trouble near the North Platte." "Nothing we could not handle," Jake assured her, settling into the chair beside hers. "A few cattle rustlers, nothing more. How have you been?" "I have been thinking," Lucy said slowly, "about what comes next for me. I cannot stay here forever, living on the Morris family's charity. I need to make a life for myself." Jake felt his stomach drop. "Are you thinking of leaving Fort Laramie?" "I do not know," Lucy admitted. "Part of me wants to continue west, to finish the journey my parents started. But another part of me feels like that dream died with them. I am not sure who I am supposed to be now." "You are supposed to be Lucy Walker," Jake said firmly. "Smart, brave, kind Lucy Walker who survived the impossible and is still standing. As for where you belong, that is for you to decide, but I hope you will not make that decision too quickly." "Why?" Lucy asked, her green eyes searching his face. Jake knew this was the moment. He could deflect, make a joke, keep his feelings hidden, or he could be honest even though it terrified him. "Because I have grown fond of having you here. Because seeing you is the best part of my day. Because somewhere along the way, making sure you are happy became the most important thing in my world." Lucy's breath caught, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then, very quietly, she said, "I thought I was imagining it, the way you look at me sometimes. I told myself I was being foolish, that you were just being kind because you felt responsible for me." "I do not feel responsible for you," Jake said. "I feel drawn to you, like a compass needle pointing north. And I know the timing is probably all wrong and you have been through so much, and maybe I am a fool for saying this, but Lucy, I think I am falling in love with you." Tears spilled down Lucy's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Oh, Jake. I have been falling in love with you for weeks, and I felt so guilty about it. Thomas has only been gone 3 months, and my parents even less. What kind of person falls in love so soon after losing everyone?" Jake reached out and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "The kind of person who knows that life is short and love is rare and precious. Your parents would want you to be happy, Lucy. Thomas would want you to live." "Do you really think so?" Lucy whispered. "I know so," Jake said. "And I promise you, if you give me a chance, I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret it." Lucy leaned forward and rested her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the warm summer air. "I am scared," she admitted. "I am scared of losing you the way I lost everyone else. I do not know if I could survive that again." "We are all scared," Jake said gently. "But being scared is not a reason to turn away from happiness. It is a reason to hold on to it even tighter when we find it." Lucy kissed him then, a soft, tentative kiss that tasted of salt and hope. Jake wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close, feeling her heart beating against his chest, marveling at the fact that this brave, beautiful woman had chosen to trust him with her wounded heart. Their courtship was not easy. Lucy had good days when she laughed and planned for the future, and bad days when the memories overwhelmed her and she could barely get out of bed. Jake learned to read her moods, to know when she needed space, and when she needed him to hold her while she cried. He was patient in a way he had never been with anyone else, because Lucy was worth waiting for, worth fighting for. In September, Jake asked Lucy to marry him, not with a grand gesture but with quiet certainty as they watched the sunset paint the sky red and gold. He offered her a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, and Lucy accepted with tears streaming down her face. They were married in October by the fort chaplain, with Dr. Morris and Beth standing as witnesses. Lucy wore a dress that Beth had helped her sew from fabric Jake had bought at the trading post, pale blue with white lace at the collar and cuffs. She carried wildflowers, and when Jake saw her walking toward him, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was so beautiful, but more than that, she was his wife, his future. The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Jake had lived alone for so long that having someone share his small cabin felt strange at first, but Lucy quickly made it a home, adding curtains to the windows and planting herbs in a small garden outside. She cooked meals that reminded Jake of his childhood, hearty stews and fresh bread that filled the cabin with warmth and delicious smells. But there were difficult moments, too. Lucy's nightmares persisted, and sometimes Jake would wake to find her standing at the window, staring out into the darkness as if expecting to see raiders approaching. On those nights, he would get up and wrap a blanket around her shoulders, standing with her until the fear passed. He never pressed her to talk about it unless she wanted to, and gradually, the nightmares became less frequent. In the spring of 1876, Jake was offered a position managing a cattle ranch about 30 miles south of Fort Laramie. It was a good opportunity, a chance to build something permanent rather than drifting from one temporary job to another. But Jake worried about taking Lucy away from the safety and community of the fort, from Beth Morris, who had become like a mother to her. "What do you think?" he asked Lucy as they lay in bed one night, her head resting on his chest as he ran his fingers through her long hair. "I think it is time for us to start our own life," Lucy said thoughtfully. "I love Beth and the doctor, but you are right. We need to build something that is ours. And I am not as fragile as I was, Jake. You have helped me become strong again." "You were always strong," Jake corrected. "I just helped you remember it." They moved to the ranch in April, a sprawling property with good grazing land and a sturdy house that needed work but had good bones. Jake threw himself into the labor of running the ranch, hiring a few hands and building up a decent herd. Lucy worked just as hard, transforming the house into a real home, painting and sewing and planting a vegetable garden that flourished under her careful attention. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and for the first time since the massacre, Lucy felt like she was living rather than just surviving. She loved the rhythm of ranch life, the way each day brought new challenges and small triumphs. And she loved watching Jake in his element, strong and confident as he worked with the cattle and horses, his face tanned by the sun and his eyes bright with purpose. In the summer of 1876, Lucy discovered she was pregnant. She was both thrilled and terrified, memories of the wagon train children who had died in the attack haunting her dreams. But Jake's steady presence and unwavering support helped her through the difficult moments. He treated her like she was made of glass and gold, insisting she rest more and worry less, bringing her wildflowers and stroking her growing belly while talking to their unborn child about all the things they would do together. Their son was born in February of 1877, a cold night when the wind howled outside, but the house was warm with firelight and hope. Lucy labored for hours, Beth Morris having come to help with the delivery, and when the baby finally arrived, crying lustily and waving tiny fists, Jake wept openly with joy. They named him James, after Jake's father, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he became the center of their universe. Jake was a devoted father, carrying James everywhere, singing to him in a surprisingly tuneful voice, marveling at every small development. Lucy watched her husband with their son and felt her heart expand with love so profound, it almost frightened her. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Jake's reputation as an honest rancher and skilled cattleman spread, and he was able to hire more hands and expand their operations. Lucy started a small business selling her preserves and baked goods to the fort and to travelers passing through, earning her own money and feeling proud of her independence. In 1879, Lucy became pregnant again, and this time she was less afraid, confident in her body's ability to bring new life into the world. Their daughter was born in October, a calm, easy birth that left Lucy tired but triumphant. They named her Alina after Lucy's mother, and she had Lucy's green eyes and Jake's dark hair. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The ranch continued to grow, and Jake became a respected figure in the community, known for his fairness and integrity. Lucy threw herself into raising their children and managing the household, but she also found time for herself, teaching reading and writing to the ranch hands who had never had the opportunity to learn. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Jake and Lucy would sit on the porch and watch the stars emerge one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. Sometimes they talked about the past, about the people they had lost, and the journey that had brought them together. But mostly they talked about the future, about their dreams for their children, about the life they were building together. "You ever think about that day?" Lucy asked one evening, her hand clasped in Jake's. "The day you found me." "Every day," Jake admitted. "Not because of the horror of it, but because it was the day my life changed. The day I found the person I was meant to spend my life with. I was so broken then," Lucy reflected. "I truly did not think I would ever feel whole again. But you put me back together, piece by piece, with so much patience and love." "You put yourself back together," Jake corrected gently. "I just held your hand while you did it. You are the strongest person I know, Lucy. You survived what would have destroyed most people, and you did not just survive, you thrived. You built a life. You made a family. That is all you, my love." Lucy leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sage and home. "We made a family together. I could not have done any of this without you, Jake. You gave me a reason to keep living when I wanted to give up. You showed me that there was still beauty and goodness in the world." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle in the distance, the whisper of wind through grass, the hoot of an owl hunting in the darkness. It was peaceful, this life they had made, and Lucy felt grateful for every moment of it. The years passed quickly, as they always do when life is full and happy. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Eleanor was bright and fearless, always getting into mischief and charming her way out of trouble. In 1882, Lucy gave birth to twins, two boys they named Joseph and Jacob, who kept everyone on their toes with their boundless energy and identical appearance. The ranch flourished under Jake's management, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Jake hired fairly, treating his workers with respect and paying them well, which meant he had loyal employees who stayed year after year. Lucy's reputation as a kind and generous woman spread, and she often opened her home to travelers in need, remembering all too well what it felt like to have nowhere to turn. In 1885, Wyoming was changing rapidly, becoming more settled and civilized. The railroad had come through, bringing with it new opportunities and challenges. Jake adapted, shipping cattle by rail and investing in improved breeding stock. He and Lucy built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, a beautiful two-story structure with wide porches and big windows that let in the light. Sometimes, visitors would ask Lucy about the faint scars on her arms, remnants of that terrible day when she had hidden beneath her parents' bodies. She never lied about where they came from, but she did not dwell on the tragedy either. Instead, she would say that they reminded her of how precious life was, how quickly everything could change, how important it was to love fiercely and forgive freely, and never take a single moment for granted. As their children grew older, Lucy and Jake told them the story of how they met, though they softened the details for younger ears. The children were fascinated by the tale, asking questions about the wagon train and the rescue, about what it felt like to fall in love under such circumstances. Jake always emphasized how brave their mother was, how she had survived the impossible through sheer will and courage. Lucy would blush and insist that Jake was the hero of the story, the man who had stopped when others might have ridden past, who had listened for signs of life when it would have been easier to assume everyone was dead. In truth, they had saved each other. Jake had given Lucy a reason to live when she had lost everything, and Lucy had given Jake a purpose beyond drifting from one job to another. They had built a life together that was richer and more meaningful than either of them had imagined possible. In 1890, James left for college in the East, determined to become a lawyer. It was hard for Lucy to see her firstborn leave, but she was proud of his ambition and intelligence. Eleanor showed signs of wanting to become a doctor, spending hours with her nose in medical texts that Dr. Morris loaned her. The twins were still young, but they already showed an aptitude for ranching, following their father around and learning everything they could about managing cattle and land. As Jake and Lucy entered their 40s, they looked back on their lives with satisfaction and forward to the future with hope. The ranch was secure, their children were healthy and happy, and their love had only deepened with time. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, droughts and harsh winters, financial setbacks and health scares, but they had weathered them together, and that had made all the difference. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Jake took Lucy back to Fort Laramie, now a bustling town rather than the frontier outpost it had been when they first met. They visited Beth and Dr. Morris, both now elderly but still sharp and engaged with life. They walked the same parade ground where they had taken those early walks together, Lucy's hand tucked into the crook of Jake's arm, and they remembered how it had felt to be young and wounded and falling in love against all odds. "I would do it all again," Lucy said as they stood watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. "Every bit of it, even the painful parts, because it led me to you. I found you once, Jake said, pulling her close. "Hiding under the bodies of those you loved, more dead than alive. And every day since then, I have thanked God that I stopped, that I looked, that I did not give up until I found you." "You did more than find me," Lucy whispered. "You brought me back to life. You showed me that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that joy could follow sorrow, that hope could bloom even in the darkest places." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon. Two people who had found each other in the midst of tragedy and built a life more beautiful than either had dared to dream. The past would always be part of them, the losses and the pain woven into the fabric of who they were, but it did not define them. What defined them was the choice they made every day to love each other, to build something good and lasting, to honor those they had lost by living fully and well. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, the stars emerging overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet, Lucy thought about the girl she had been, hiding under her parents' bodies, too terrified to move or breathe. That girl had been convinced her life was over, that she had nothing left to live for. But she had been wrong. She had survived for a reason, and that reason was riding beside her now, his hand occasionally reaching over to squeeze hers, his presence a constant reminder that miracles happened, that love was real, that even the darkest night eventually gave way to dawn. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. In 1893, Alina was accepted to medical school, one of the first women to be admitted to the program. Lucy cried with pride at her daughter's achievement, remembering her own mother's quiet strength and knowing she would have been proud too. James, now a practicing lawyer, married a lovely young woman from Boston and brought her home to meet the family. The twins took over more responsibility on the ranch, allowing Jake to slow down a bit, though he never stopped working entirely. In 1895, Lucy became a grandmother when James and his wife welcomed a baby girl. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Lucy was overwhelmed with emotion. This tiny, perfect child was a testament to everything she and Jake had built, proof that love and life continued, that the future was bright with possibility. She thought of her own mother and father, of how they had sacrificed everything to save her, and she whispered a silent thank you to them, knowing that their legacy lived on in this new generation. Jake and Lucy aged gracefully together, their hair turning silver, their faces lined with the marks of years spent laughing and worrying and loving. They moved a bit slower now, their bodies bearing the aches and pains of hard work and full lives, but they never lost their connection, that deep bond forged in tragedy and strengthened through decades of partnership. In 1900, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with all 4 children and 3 grandchildren in attendance. It was a joyous occasion, full of laughter and storytelling, good food and music. Jake gave a toast, his voice still strong despite his 60 years, speaking of Lucy's courage and grace, of how she had made him a better man, of how loving her had been the greatest privilege of his life. Lucy responded with her own words, thanking Jake for seeing her when she was at her lowest, for believing in her when she could not believe in herself, for building a life with her that exceeded her wildest dreams. She looked around the table at their children and grandchildren, at the legacy of love they had created, and she felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible on that terrible day in 1875, when she had lost everything. As the party wound down and the grandchildren were tucked into bed, Lucy and Jake walked out to the porch one last time, as they had done countless times before. The ranch stretched out before them in the moonlight, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and dedication. In the distance, Cattle grazed quietly, and the night air was sweet with the scent of sage and summer flowers. "We did good, did we not?" Jake asked, his arm around Lucy's shoulders. "We did better than good," Lucy replied, leaning into his warmth. "We built something beautiful out of ashes. We created life and love and family where there had only been death and loss. That is more than good, Jake. That is miraculous. You are the miracle," Jake said softly. "Every day I get to spend with you is a gift I never take for granted." They stood together in the quiet night, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds, who had loved through pain and joy, through hardship and abundance, through every season of life. The buzzards that had circled overhead on that fateful day in 1875 were long gone, replaced by hope and promise, and the certain knowledge that love, real love, could survive anything. Lucy thought back to the terrified 19-year-old girl who had hidden beneath her parents' bodies, certain her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that a cowboy with kind eyes would find her and save her, that she would fall in love and build a family and live a life so full of happiness it would sometimes take her breath away. But perhaps it was better that the young Lucy had not known what was coming. Perhaps the journey was sweeter for having been unexpected. As they finally turned to go inside, Lucy paused and looked up at the stars, the same stars that had watched over her on that terrible night so many years ago. "Thank you," she whispered, to her parents, to fate, to God, to whatever force in the universe had brought Jake to her that day. "Thank you for giving me this life." Jake heard her whispered words and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Thank you for choosing to live it," he replied. "Thank you for being brave enough to love again." They went inside together, closing the door on the night, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, just as they had faced everything else for the past 25 years. Their love story had begun in tragedy, but it had become something transcendent, proof that the human spirit could triumph over even the darkest circumstances, that hope could bloom in the most barren soil. That love, true love, was worth fighting for, worth living for, worth everything. And so they lived, Jake and Lucy Everett, on their ranch in Wyoming, surrounded by family and friends, their days full of purpose and their nights full of peace. They grew old together, watching their children build their own lives, welcoming more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren into the world. The ranch passed down through generations, a legacy of hard work and integrity that Jake and Lucy had established, and that their descendants proudly maintained. When Jake finally passed away in 1920 at the age of 71, Lucy held his hand and whispered all the things she had said 1,000 times before, but needed to say once more. She thanked him for saving her life, for loving her so completely, for giving her 45 years of happiness beyond measure. And Jake, with his last breath, told her that finding her had been the purpose of his existence, that every moment with her had been worth living, that he would wait for her on the other side. Lucy lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories of the old days, of the wagon train and the cowboy who had stopped to listen for survivors, of falling in love under the vast Wyoming sky, of building a life from nothing but hope and determination. She passed peacefully in her sleep in 1925, a small smile on her face, and those who knew her best said she looked like a young woman again, free of the weight of years and sorrow. They buried her next to Jake on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at it, with wildflowers blooming all around. And if you visit that place today, you can still see their headstones standing side by side, marking the resting place of two people who had found each other in the darkest of times and had loved each other through everything that followed, proving that even in the wild and often brutal West, love could not only survive but thrive, growing stronger with each passing year until it became something eternal.